As a reminder, for more Microsoft Webcasts, you can visit Microsoft.com/webcasts. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Msdn Webcast, Visual C#, Soup to Nuts, today's session being Part 16, Custom Web Controls. And now, without any further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to today's presenter, William Steele.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome everybody to today's webcast. This is, like Tracy said, Part 16. We are of the 22-part series, so we're coming into the backstretch here, actually turning into the final quarters here, aren't we? This month and next month we'll do it. Today we're going to be talking about a custom web controls. We introduced C# and the web last week, and one of the items that I introduced last week was the user control. So we're going to start off by taking a look at the user control in a little bit more detail. We're going to build another one. I've had a couple of people ask me, what they're good for and things like that. So we'll kind of cover some of that stuff. We'll show you how to build one a little more advanced than what we did last week, though still simple enough. And then we'll move into server controls. We'll talk about what they are and how you can use them and how you can then extend the existing server controls that ship with ASP.NET. And then move into building your own custom controls, and we'll see how those controls can be used in the designers within Visual Studio or within the Visual C# Express or Visual Web Developer Express environments to allow you to add functionality to Visual Studio in a neat little way. And then we'll extend that even further by adding what we call design time support to those controls, so that these controls, whether they're in a web page or whether they're in the Visual Studio environment, act a little differently, act appropriate to what's going on in the environment. So that's what we'll be covering today. To start off with, I'm just going to cover up a little bit of a review about what we did last week. We did talk about the web and how C# can be used to the web and used on the web. And one of the items that I introduced last week was custom user controls. Custom user controls were, if you remember, really simple ASP.NET page-like features that you build it just like a page. You drag and drop controls on it. They're really, really easy to implement. They do have a couple downsides, though, and the downside in that case being that you can't redistribute them across multiple web pages pretty easily. You actually have to copy the page into each and every website that you're going to be using it in. There really isn't a way to share that. The other downside is because they are ASP.NET pages, they're easy to edit as an ASP.NET page. So if you're looking to make money by shipping controls, user controls aren't the way to do that. They can be used in that arena. However, there's no way to really lock other users out from modifying them and changing the way they work and everything. So let me go ahead and pop back into user control, pop into a demo here. We'll do a quick overview of user control. We'll build one, and then I'll show you a couple little advanced features of user controls that you can use while you're building your own applications. And show you how they're actually integrated into a web page, so you can understand when you're looking at a web page what you're actually looking at and how you can actually utilize that for extending your own web pages or extending your own websites. So I'm going to go ahead and pop into a demo here. And if your computer has screen resolution set to 1024 by 768 or higher, you can press the F5 key, and that will maximize your display so you can see my entire screen. As always, if we're going to start off by taking a look at my blog site, I do have the demo code and everything already available out there on my blog. Actually, just pop out there, and so you can see where it's at, so where you can download it. So you should be seeing my screen now, and the first page that I have up on here is my blog address, and here you can see the latest entry for today. This is the custom web controls session, and here you can see the zip file down here that contains all the demo code that I'll be going over today. So you can go ahead and download this at will whenever you want to. Okay, so let me pop over to my website. Now last week we had a website, and I built a really simple user control. So let me just go ahead and build another one for this site. Now, here I have a default.aspx page, and this default.aspx page doesn't really have anything in it right now. You can see I have the empty form tag and the empty div tags. Also note that there aren't any additional items below the @page directive before we actually get to the HTML or the XHTML portion of the document. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to add a new user control to this page. We're just going to call this Web User Control, and we can call it anything we want to. This is pretty much whatever you want to use. I'm just actually going to just call this my user control, just to be a little unique. And again, I'm going to choose the language C# and go ahead and place the code in a separate file. That way, we actually have the code behind attributes that we're kind of used to seeing from an ASP.NET page perspective. So here's my user control, and you can see if I drill down into this, I actually do get the C# code behind it. And the C# code behind in my particular example doesn't really have anything in it except the page load event. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of functionality to this. We'll switch over to the design view, and we'll go ahead and add a panel. I'll switch over to the design view. It's taking a couple seconds. Play the Jeopardy theme here. Okay, there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a panel and drag a panel out onto the form here. And then inside that panel, we'll go ahead and drop a label control. And then if I switch back to the source view, you can see that we've got our panel control, we have our label control, and let's go ahead and reformat that a little bit. So there you can see we have everything. We have a panel nested inside our label control. Now this is okay, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a little bit of customization to this and expose some properties beyond what we actually see in the controls themselves. So what I'm going to do is in my control, I'm going to go ahead and add a couple custom properties. So if you remember from the properties session that we did a while back, to type a property, all I have to do is type in the word prop, P-R-O-P, and hit the tab key. And that will go ahead and extend that out into, there we go, my property. And then I can go ahead and type in the type of property it is. This is going to return a string value. And the name of this property, we're just going to call this our text property. And I'm using the lowercase text on the private member variable. But when I move to the public portion of it, I'm going to type in a uppercase word test. And what that's done is that's going to name this. The publicly exposed name will have a capital T, but the private member variable that actually stores the data will have a lowercase t. Now remember, this is something that you cannot do in Visual Basic because Visual Basic is case sensitive. C# is not case sensitive. I can use mix upper and lower case and have them represent two different objects. So I'm going to do one other thing here. Let's set up a color. So I'm again type in prop and hit tab, and then we'll type in a string. We'll call this string color. And we'll, again, capitalize the member variable. So now what I've done is I've just created two simple properties on my user control. If I go ahead and save this, and I go to my default page here, if I switch over to Design View, I can take my user control, and I can just drop it right on the page. And you can see I have my panel with my label control inside it. Now what you can also see when we do this is as I select this control, the properties show up, and you can see that I've added the color and the text properties to the properties dialog box of the application. So now that I have those in there, I can actually assign those to whatever I want. So let's just say red, and we'll just say hello world. Now you'll notice that as I assign these properties, nothing happens because I haven't actually told the control what to do with these properties. So if I go over back to the control, I can actually also, beyond, by the way, assigning it inside here, I can actually go to the default.aspx page and bring up the user control. And you'll notice that when I set those properties, it's actually added them to the My User Control tag of my page. This is something that's kind of interesting because I can assign those properties right here and do whatever I want to with them. That's kind of a nice feature. It embeds it right inside the HTML so we can see exactly what's going on here. You'll also note one other thing that is added to this. Beyond just the user control, you see this tag here called UC1. This tag basically is the tag prefix for my namespace. And what the way this ASP.NET is working here is that it's added this additional @register statement. And it's basically saying, hey, I'm going to register this control under this name utilizing this prefix. And there you can see that's the UC1 prefix. So there you can see my prefix, colon, and then the name of my control, which is up here, user control, and the type of the control it is. And then here's the name I gave the individual control on the web page. Each one is uniquely named. And then the other two properties there that we set, the color and the text property. We're always going to have the run at server because that's going to allow the server side to actually see the values and stuff in this control. So I've set those properties. Let's go ahead and use them now. To utilize these properties, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a couple items in here. First off, I'm going to remove the text property from the label control because it's already there. Instead, I'm going to insert the text property, the value, right inside our page here. So just by using the at page, the ampersands here, or the percent signs, I'm sorry, the bracket percent and the bracket percent allow us to actually get to any properties that we have exposed on this object. So in this case, I'm assigning the value text to whatever's in between these tags here. And I can now also do the same thing for the color. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop a div tag in here. And this div tag, I'm going to go ahead and assign the back color, or one of the color properties here. We can actually I'll do this through a style sheet in this case. So our background color is going to be equal to whatever our color is. So in our case, our color is going to come from, again, that percent sign equals color. And make sure we close that div tag out. There we go. So there I've assigned, I've embedded the color value. Remember the color value is this property here. I've embedded that in the div tag as the background color for this div. And then I have the panel itself containing the div tag, and then inside the div tag I have my label tag. So whatever is contained within the div tag will inherit this background color. In our case, I believe the value is set to red. So let's go ahead and run this. Go back to the default page and execute that. And this should allow us to see that when we type in text, when we type in properties there, we have the ability to override features without changing the application, just by changing the properties. So there you can see it spun up my test server. Visual Web Developer Express includes the test server, and there you can see my background text is red, and the foreground text itself is Hello World. So I built a custom user control that contains some custom properties. Because I have access to the C# code here, I can do anything else I want to. If I want to expose events, I can also add those events right to this page. Remember from our events and delegate session there, just by simply creating an event, that will allow me to expose it, and then I can respond to those events. Those are going to get raised in my code behind for my page through this user control object right here. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit understanding user controls. I do want to point out there is one other thing that we can do here. I can also default the properties of these boxes here. So in this case, we'll just say it's always going to be Hello World by default until it's overridden by something else. And when I say overridden by something else, that means setting the property in my page here. So in this case, it says Hello World. I could have said Good Morning. And then over here on the control itself, I can default the color to white. So in this case, the default color is white, but we've overridden it with these values to red. So those, if I did not assign the values in the default.aspx page, these values would be the default values. So that's another thing to point out that I actually have in my sample code. So those are user controls. They're pretty easy to use. They do have like I said, a couple downsides. It's a page that's included in it, and anybody could go through here and modify this that wanted to. There's really no way of protecting this, and there's really no mechanism for distributing these beyond copy-paste. So the alternative is to use something like a server control, and these controls in the toolbox over here are all instances of server controls. In fact, what's interesting is that my user control is made up of a bunch of server controls, being the panel and the label control in this case. So wouldn't it be better to build a server control that you could actually add to the toolbox and drag out and drop into your application as opposed to distributing with your application? And that's exactly what server controls are for. So let me pop back over, take a look at any questions in the queue, and then we'll move into server controls. I have one question in the queue. So Ted's asking, between the percent brackets, can I get to any property? I can get to any publicly exposed property that is on that object. Yes, you can. Yes, if they're publicly exposed. Okay, post all. Okay, so let's talk about server controls. Now, a server control is similar to the user control, except that it's packaged up as a single assembly or DLL that runs on the server. Now, the way the server controls work is that they actually are processed on the server, but their output is sent as HTML back to the client. Actually, I shouldn't say just HTML. They can actually include other things like JavaScript and other types of client-specific features, images and things like that. But in our case, what we're doing is we're sending the data from the server back to the client so that the client can render it. Now, what's interesting about server controls is because they are .NET assemblies, they can actually be registered in what's called the global assembly cache. In other words, I can have the control registered on my server in one location and reference it from all of my client applications that use it or my web servers that are using it. And by doing that, whenever I need to make a change to that control, I just go to that one control, make the change, register it in the GAC, and then everything else is automatically updated the next time they try to load that control. So that you don't have to copy and paste it to every application that you have out there. You simply store it in the GAC of the machine, and then every service that's running on that machine has access to it. Now, there's a lot of standard ones that are built into Windows, specifically into ASP.NET. And they're things that we use all the time, the text box controls, the label controls, the list boxes. All those controls that you saw in the toolbox in Visual Studio are server controls built into ASP.NET, or are server controls that are not just built into ASP.NET, but can actually be added to ASP.NET through adding another assembly to it. Now, it wouldn't be much good if the server controls were, just the server controls that you saw. But in a lot of cases, that a server control might perform some of the functions that you need, but not all of the functions. So what we've done is we've made it these server controls extensible. So, for example, you can take a text box and add functionality to it to make it, a more powerful text box, like a password box. Or a calendar control that you can actually tell it to limit the date range that you can pick. Those are examples of extending the existing controls, and it's actually really, really easy to extend existing controls. You simply create a class and inherit from that class the type that you want to. Say, for example, I want to modify my text box, then I'm simply going to inherit from the previous text box, and then I can override or add to any of the functionality that existed in that one. So let's go ahead and pop into a demo of creating our own extended server control by taking a look at the text box control and making it do something a little more than what it did before out of the box. So back into the demo here. Back into the demo slide. There we go. I'm going to move over to C#, and in C# what we're going to do is we're actually going to build our custom control. Now, in order to do this, I need to add a few things. There are some references that I need to add to this. First off, because we're doing web-based development, we need to actually add the system.web.ui functionality. And this will take just a second to come up here. There we go. So we'll move down into, we're going to select a few of these. We've already got the system namespace that we need. Go down here. So here we have system.web. System.web contains several namespaces that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the day for doing things like it contains the list of controls that we're going to be using, contains the list of the types of controls. It also contains some additional hidden features that we're going to be adding in the last demo that are actually really interesting. But let's start off with by creating a public class now called myTextBox. And myTextBox is going to be, we're basically going to take the text box, but we're going to add another feature to it that basically didn't exist before that. You'll see what I mean once we get there. So let me go ahead and add a few using statements here. Because we are doing web-based stuff, we need to actually reference the system.web.ui namespace. And underneath of it, there are a few things that we also need to reference. System.web.ui. In this case, we're going to be looking at HTML controls, and we'll go ahead and add the other one what you saw there, which was web controls. Now we're not using the adapter section there, but this will just allow us make it easier on us so that we don't have to type in everything that type in the name of all of the controls as we're typing them in. So for example, now I can actually inherit from the text box, whereas before if I hadn't referenced these, I would have had to type in system.web.ui.webcontrols.textbox. So that allows me to shortcut that. So now I've just created a custom control that extends the text box control. Now, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and save this, and we'll call this our server control. We'll save that. And we'll build this project. So there I built the project, and now I can go over to my my C# or my web-based application here. And let me just pop over to the design view. Move down here. And I'm going to right mouse click on the toolbox here, and I'm going to add a new tab. We're going to call this Bills tab. So Bill Stuff. And inside of Bill Stuff, I'm actually going to choose a new item. And the new item that I'm going to choose is simply going to be the name of the control, or the DLL, the assembly control that I just built here called myTextBox. And you'll notice it's in a namespace called Server Control 1. So we're going to just browse out to this. And this is going to be in my C# soup to nuts directory under Web Controls, Server Control 1. And if we drill down into the binary directory, into the release code, there you can see server control 1.dll. There's my assembly. So there I've chosen that, and you can see it's automatically added my text box and server control 1 as a checkbox here. And when I click OK, there you can see it's added under build stuff, my text box. So I've just created a custom control by extending the existing text box control. But I haven't added any functionality to it just yet, but I do have it out there. And now I can take this and drop it out there, and lo and behold, it's going to look just like a text box because I told it my control is a text box. And it'll take a second to spin this up. Yep, it's taking a second to spin it up, all right. There we go. There's my text box. And you can see what it's done is it's added a bin directory to my project site here, and inside that bin directory it's placed that server control 1.dll file, but it's also created a PDB file. This is a debugging file. You can actually delete it later on if you need it, if you need to. It's not really relevant to the application. It's just used for debugging purposes. It contains a bunch of pointers and stuff inside the code. But there you can see the DLL itself. And then you can see how it renders itself into the client. It renders it just like a regular control. And in fact, if we move over and look at the source code, you'll see that it actually has inserted the text box control similar to the way it did the user control by using the @register, only instead of using the @register with a source file, it's using the @register with an assembly. And that assembly happens to be that source control 1.dll assembly. So there you can see source control 1, and it's given it the tag prefix of CC1. So anything that's contained within my custom code is going to be using the CC1 prefix. And I can change those if I wanted to. That just happens to be what it did by default. So there you can see my text box, and I can put in code here. Go ahead and run that code. And we should get our application spun up with a text box that contains the words "Hello World" in it. And there you see my text box with the word "Hello World" in it. And I can edit this from here because it is a standard text box. Okay, so There I've created a control, but I really haven't done anything beyond just creating the control. What I'm going to show you now is how you can take this control and actually override features of functionality that's already there. And the way a control works is it does something called rendering. And rendering is, there's a method in here called render that allows us to actually expose what this control does. And what render does is it actually writes out to your client's browser what it wants to display. So if I type in public override, when I hit the space bar, you notice that I get a list of all of the functionality that is exposed inside of this custom control. And if we scroll down to the render method, you can see it actually creates what's called a text writer. And in this case, what it's doing is I'm actually overriding the render method that was actually on this text box before. And then we have the actual base class render method that we write to. So basically what it's doing is inside here, it's actually, the way this code is written as you see it on the screen now, is it's going to do exactly what it was going to do before. It's simply going to write that out. Now, instead of doing this though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this up a little bit. Instead of just doing the render method, which writes the contents of it, and when I say the contents of it, I mean it's what's between the tags, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the render to the render begin tag. This method is also there. This is the tag that starts before we start writing any code to the client. In other words, if we look at our page here, we see we have this tag right here. This is the beginning tag. Here we have our content, and here we have our end tag. Okay. In our case, what I'm doing is I'm actually hooking the event where we are overriding what happens before we write the begin tag. So in other words, before we write this tag out to the client, what is it that we're going to put there? And in my case, I'm actually going to insert some more code here by simply adding my code to the writer here. Now you can see this writer is an object called an HTML text writer, and it's really nice that they give us these because I can simply start writing out my own code to these. I can add attributes, I can add styles. I'm actually just going to use the standard old write method, and I'm just going to hand code this myself. Add a div tag and put Bill was here, and then slash div tag, and I can close that out. Now one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this fall below it, so we'll add a break there. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to write Bill was here above whatever that text box did before. So in this case, I'm just inserting some code between this control here and the beginning of this control before it writes it out. So it's going to insert some text inside there when it renders this to the client. And that's actually a pretty neat little feature there, that we can override portions of the user controls. Or if I would have just overridden the render method, I would have overwritten the entire user control. So there's some pretty cool things going on inside there. So let me go ahead and build this again. Oops, have a little bug here. Let's see, begin. Oh, you know what? Got to do that. That's what the problem is. I changed the name of it. It's render begin tag. I need to call the base class render begin tag. Okay, what are we doing here? Cannot change access modifiers when overriding public. Oh, that's public. There we go. That compiled. Time to ship it, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove this control from my list box, or from my toolbox, and we'll go ahead and re-add that control back. So choose the item, and what that's going to do is that's going to replace the assembly that's out here with the new one that I'm just adding to the control box. Because remember, when I added it to the toolbox, it basically copied the assembly to Visual Studio. So now what I'm going to do is just go back out and pick the new version of the control that I just updated. Hit OK, and you'll see that'll add it back to the toolbox. I can then go ahead and remove this guy, pop that back out there, and say yes, that is actually going to replace the assemblies in the bin directory with the new assemblies. And now if I go ahead and run this, you'll see that from the client's or from the development environment's perspective, we haven't added anything beyond my regular text box control. But when I go and run this now, when I run this, you're going to see that my text box is going to behave a little bit differently than a standard text box. And there you can see it's behaving a little bit differently because it's inserted the bill was here, and then on the new line placed the text box below that. And we can go and actually view the source of that and see that that is exactly what it does. Here you can see the div bill was here with the break, and then the other div before the actual text box is rendered to the client. And there you can see the rendering of the text box. So I was able to insert my own HTML code. In other words, I overrode the functionality of the standard text box by actually inserting my own code into that. So inserting your own code into text boxes is pretty cool, but sometimes you might want to start off from scratch and build your own. And that's what we're actually going to do with custom server controls. Let me go ahead and look at the questions in the queue. Okay, so Ted is actually asking a good question. He's asking, what is the difference between adding a reference and specifying using, and that reference namespace? The reference namespace in the, I assume you're talking about the reference namespace. Actually, I don't know where you're talking about the reference namespace. Can you clarify that a little bit more, Ted? While you're doing that, I will say that adding a reference simply tells Visual Studio that you're going to be using this so that when you go to compile it, it needs to tell the compiler where that assembly is or where that library is that you're going to be using. Adding the using statements simply tells Visual Studio how to shortcut the names. So when I chose text box earlier, text box is actually the entire namespace is system.web.ui.webcontrols.textbox. So that's a very long name to type, and if I was using text box over and over and over, I wouldn't want to type that every single time. So we use the using keyword that will say basically allows us to give it an alias or allows it to find any control. It basically adds it to the search list so that it doesn't have, so I don't, as a user, as a developer, have to type in system.web.ui.webcontrols.textbox every single time I want to use a text box. I can simply type text box because it already knows that I'm going to be using some of the controls within that system.web.ui.controls namespace. So that allows me to shortcut that. That's what the using does. The using does nothing technically to the machine except allow me to type in shorter amounts of code. Adding the reference, though, actually adds a flag on the compiler telling it that I am going to be using controls within that library. And Andre is asking, can't I create the server control in MS Web Developer Express Edition? In Web Developer Express Edition, I suppose you can do it. You would actually have to add a class and everything. I just like to show that it's a separate environment with C#. They're both free, so it doesn't make any difference. Would using work if you did not add the reference to that system DLL when adding it to the system.dll? The answer to that is no, the using would not work because I haven't added the reference. Using can only work on namespaces where there's been a reference already created to it. Okay. And somebody's pointed out that I have my BR slash as opposed to /BR. That's okay. Either one works. It's at the end. I'm closing the tag. Okay, so let's talk about custom server controls. In our case, we have built a control that extends the existing text box control, but just as easily we can create a control that implements our own functionality. So in our case there we had the, I inserted the div tag for what did I insert the div tag for? Before the text box, thank you. So what I can also do is just basically do the exact same thing, except inheriting from a specific control, I can inherit from the generic control system.web.ui.control. By overriding from that generic control and overriding the by inheriting from that control and overriding the render method in the base class, I can actually create that control and have it do anything that I want to. In other words, I can insert HTML code, or I can have it send back JavaScript code that runs at the client. And that's exactly how server controls work in ASP.NET. We're overriding the functionality that's in the client. Now, some advanced controls actually do the exact same thing, but they take it a step further because web servers have this ability to detect what type of client it is. And through IIS, we call that browser capture, browser capabilities. You can actually look at the browser capabilities and send different bits of JavaScript depending on what the client is that you're actually reading. So let's go ahead and pop out to our demonstration again and actually go quickly through a custom server control similar to the way we just did the user control, or the extended text box control where I added my name to the top of it. So you'll see that this is pretty much the exact same code. Over in my server control, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new class, and we'll call this my we'll just call it tool. But instead of inheriting from the text box, I'm just going to inherit from control. And you see that's an option for me automatically. And then I did one earlier. Let's see, public override render. Let's just take the render. And you notice when I hit the tab, it automatically expanded out. So now I have my render control. This is exactly the same code I did here. I can just go ahead and have it render my own code right here. So Bill was here, and we'll say true. And by the way, this is what somebody was saying. I could do that. Actually, since this is the closing tag, either one would work. That opens and closes it. Okay, so in that case, what I've done is I've basically created another control within the same server control 1 namespace, and in fact, it's going to be within the same assembly. So that now when I go ahead and build this, I'm going to have two controls in there, one called my text box and one called my tool. My tool is simply going to render whatever my custom code is. This, we can make this custom as well. This is a custom control that's going to go ahead and render out however we want it to. So you can insert your own stuff. You'll also notice that these writers are a lot more sophisticated. Not only can you do that, but you can render the begin tags, the end tags, and make them custom. You can actually change those depending on what the client is. Render breaks and things like that. There's all kinds of power that you get with these these HTML text writers. They understand what HTML is. I'm going to recommend that you not do it this way, hard coding it, because that simply is it's simply for me a way to demonstrate to you very quickly how to do it. Okay, so now that I have this, we'll go ahead and build this control. And we're going to go back to Visual Studio, the web developer, go back to the default.axps page, and I'm actually going to delete this one again. And we're going to go ahead and add the new items again, just like I did before. And this time, though, you'll notice that I have two controls in there. I have my text box and my tool. And when I click on it, I now have two of those items inside here. So let me go ahead and let's just drag out, let's remove this guy, and we'll drag out my text box again. Again, it's going to replace these in here. That's what the dialog boxes are asking. It's replacing those items in the bin directory. And then we'll go ahead and bring out my new tool that I just built as well. My new tool, you'll see, it's going to look identical to this control here, except that it has a different name. Instead of my text box, it's called my tool. We've given it a default name called my tool 1. And if I had any events, again, in my server control, those I would be able to double click on and get to the code behind in C# and actually edit the code to respond to those events. So here's my custom tool. Here's my text box. If we go ahead and run this, here you can see this is my custom control down below my text box. So it's actually inserted that control. Even though it's not a text box, it's not a label, it's not anything, it's just displaying that HTML out. So I can make it do whatever I wanted to at this point. So just like this guy's writing out the input tag, I could have put this in an input tag or done all kinds of fancy things here to make this control do something more than what we're seeing. popping back over to the designer view, you'll see that this custom control pretty much looks like a custom control. I've got a little border around it. When I click on it, I can get to the properties of this custom control. Visibility and view state are items that are actually exposed by default through these controls. Here, my other control here, notice that as I select the text box, it actually brings up the entire thing with the text above it as well. But this is the exact same experience that I get at runtime. Sometimes it would be helpful to have a different experience at runtime than what you do at design time. And that's what we're going to talk about next, the ability to actually customize our code for the particular experience, whether you're running it or whether you're developing it. Before I do that, I got two more questions in the queue. Veer's asking, if you create a control with color and font attributes, would a CSS sheet override those attributes? That's actually a good question. It depends on how you did the control. A lot of times, depending on how you set the properties, if they're your own custom properties, then that might not be the case that they get overridden. In the custom properties, you would actually have to include that functionality. But if they were standard properties, like a font text box, and you were inheriting from that, then yes, they would automatically do that because those controls automatically do that. Ted's asking, to have a new version of the custom control, we have to delete the icons on the toolbar and re-reference the DLL again. What kind of control is a my tool? Is it a label? Okay, in our case, there is a couple different ways you can actually redo the controls. I could have simply copied the new DLL into the project, or I could have dragged the DLL onto the toolbar. Dragging it onto the toolbar would automatically update it as well, or adding it the way I did. There's several different ways that you can do that. What kind of a control is my tool? It is not a label. It's rendering itself inside of a div tag with text. So the closest thing it would be is a div tag, but it isn't. It is a custom control that is not inherited from anything beyond it. So it has no specifics of whether it's a control. It just knows that it's a control, and it renders itself as a div tag. Okay, and Andre, is there a design view for server controls? As a matter of fact, that's the part I'm taking next. And Sandeep saying that is correct. I have not done event handling related to the server controls in my example. I did not do that, no. But it's just the same. If you go back and do the event handling session that we did, we do it on any type of class where you do an event. It's the exact same code. There's nothing different. Okay, so let's talk about design time controls. In our controls here, we have the exact same rendering, whether that's in the Visual Studio environment or in the client's web browser. And that's really not the way most controls work. Most controls have the ability to understand that a developer is actually working with them. So we expose some additional functionality or widgets that allow the users to actually work with them through the designers. And adding a design time control support doesn't necessarily mean I have to modify my class to support the fancy, all this stuff inside of it. In other words, I don't want to ship all these fancy designers with my end user's code. I only want the designers in the developers, on the developers' machines. So we have the option here of adding what we call design time control support. And to do that, we add a designer attribute to our class, and we tell our designer attribute what the name of our class is that's actually going to handle the functionality and how it's going to render when we're in Visual Studio or another environment that understands the design time controls environment. So to do that, once I add my attribute, I'm going to create a class that derives basically from Control Designer. And the Control Designer class is actually inside a namespace called system.design. So we actually have to add the system.design namespace reference to our applications. And then we use some additional using statements that allow us to actually get to the designer attributes. Once we have that, we have a new method to implement, or basically override, that's called getDesignTimeHTML. GetDesignTimeHTML basically renders differently. Anything I render inside that is going to be rendered only when I'm in the designer environment, as opposed to when I'm in the runtime environment. There are a few other optional attributes for the design time experience. You can actually, for example, specify the control name, the control tag. You saw the control name and the control tag in ASP.NET when I dropped the control onto the page. I had my tool and I also had CC1 as the name and the tag. Those can actually be specified as attributes on the design in my my design time control, and I can also specify other properties. But let's go ahead and pop out and take a look at, in this last demo, how to actually add some designer functionality to our control, so we understand that it's running in a different mode than when we're actually in production mode. So back over to my code here. I'm going to go over to C#. Now in C#, again, I said I had to add some references here, so I'm going to add one more reference, and it's going to be system.design. And you'll notice that this one stands alone on itself. It isn't a part of any others. But when I add system.design, it actually gives me some other features that I didn't have before. System.web.ui.design. That wasn't there before. And then one more is using system.web.ui.design. Oops. System spelled correctly. And in this case, we're going to choose web controls because we're actually going to be designing our web controls. Okay, so I've added these two new references that allow us to get to the designer functionality contained within the system.design namespace. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of code to this to tell it that what I'd like this control to do is have an external designer. So we're going to use the bracket here, and we're going to type in designer. And for some reason, I have a mistake here. Let's see, system.componentModel.design. Need that one in there as well. All right, somewhere I'm missing another one. System.web.design and UI.design. Let's try HTML controls as well. I'm missing a namespace in here. That's not in there. Web control. Okay, I'm missing one somewhere. One, generics, text, got that. UI, UI design, HTML controls, got that. Component, component model design, UI design web controls, and UI web controls. All right, make sure we get all of these in here. There it is, designer. You want to make a note, forgot the component model. The component model is actually the guy that describes well, actually it describes the model of the components inside here, and one of those is the designer attributes for these components. So adding this designer attribute allows us to now go ahead and specify a type of a particular class. And our class, we're going to call this My Tool Designer. Even though it doesn't exist just yet, I'm going to go ahead and create that. So we're going to specify that we've got a new class called My Tool Designer. Let's go ahead and build that. Public class. We'll call it My Tool Designer. And this guy is going to inherit from, remember, the control designer. So now what this has done is that we've taken this class, this My Tool, and we've specified that, hey, in the design time environment, we're going to use this class down here to specify our design time behavior that is different from our standard runtime behavior. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and simply override the string called getDesignTimeHTML. And here you can see the getDesignTimeHTML actually has a base class called getDesignTimeHTML. We're just going to go ahead and, instead of returning what it normally returns, we're just going to have it return div, this is designer code. So this would be custom for the design time environment, as opposed to this custom control code that it's going to return. It's actually going to return this is a designer code. So in this case, it's actually pretty simple. We're just overriding what's going to be written out, and so instead of it writing this code out, it's going to write this code out. And that's all there is to the design time environment. Let me go ahead and compile that. Copy that name, paste that correctly. Spelled the name wrong, so there we go. That's recompiled that. If I go ahead and delete this control, add an item. Browse to that control, server control 1. Hit OK. Here's my new tool. Go ahead and place that on there. Yes, we are going to replace the library. Yes, we are going to place that. Once that runs that, this is a custom control, and this is the EU. Oh, of course it isn't working. Why isn't it working today? What did I miss? So we've got the designer. You know what? I didn't delete both of these, did I? Let's do that. Rebuild this project. So I've got my designer. Basically, it's specifying that this control is going to be the designer for that. Back in Visual Studio, I can go ahead and add those items. There's my two controls and my tool. There it is. Notice that this is designer code, which is the custom. You would only see that code when we are actually in the Visual Studio environment. But when I run the exact same code now, instead of seeing this is designer code, it's actually going to let us know that we're actually in a runtime environment because it's going to say the code that was specified for the runtime code. This is a custom control. So there we can actually respond to whether we're in a design time environment or within a runtime environment. Now if I expose properties on this control, just like I expose properties in my user control, those properties would again show up inside here and allow me to edit those. In addition to that, I could also actually add custom designers like right mouse click handlers and things like that to the code so that I can display up a context menu, or even drill down and show different types of items. For example, some of the items that you can do is pick out a color and drop in color boxes like this, control pickers and things like that. And that's simply specifying that that control type, or the property type, is of that type of control, and the designer will give you that nice design time experience automatically. So there you can see we can actually handle different types of scenarios, whether runtime or design time. Some of the other things that I didn't show you that I highly encourage you to go explore is that in our case we've got the standard default gear icons for these. We also show the metadata underneath there, my text box and the .NET component. Those are things that you can also override. For example, to actually add a new icon to this, you simply create a 16 pixel by 16 pixel bitmap and add it to the server control, and then include that as a resource in the control itself. And when you compile it, it's going to have the same name. So in our case, it would be called, you might call it mytool.bmp. 16 by 16 that you add as a resource to the object, that will automatically replace this icon. So there's quite a few things that you can do there with these controls to extend them or build your own controls. All right, so let me go ahead and pop back and look at the question. Carl's asking, if I don't add any custom designer code, does the design time display match the runtime behavior? Yes, except for a small dotted outline that Visual Studio automatically adds. Otherwise, you are going to, if you don't add any custom designer code, the display will match the runtime behavior, and it should actually execute the same way as well. So that was the last question I had in the queue right there. Let's go ahead and summarize here, and we'll get into the survey. If there are any more questions, you guys can go ahead and put them in the questions and answers queue, and I will get to those in just a second. But we covered custom user controls. You saw how I added a couple custom properties to a standard user control. We talked about what was good and what was bad in user controls, and saw how the server controls actually replace that. Server controls actually run code on the server, yet on the client render themselves as standard HTML controls. So we saw how we can take a standard text box or any other standard controls and extend those out by simply inheriting from that control and then overriding the rendering methods or the pre-render or the post-rendering methods that are standard on those standard controls. So you can override their behaviors. You can also completely replace some of their behaviors by using some of the polymorphic stuff that we learned a couple weeks ago in the inheritance and polymorphism session. We also built a custom server control, and in our case it was a very simple server control that simply displayed the results of some text, but then we added some design time behavior to it that made it act differently within the design time environment than it did in the runtime environment, so that you can actually handle the extra features that designers need or developers need when they're actually building and using their control. So for example, having wizards that set properties and things like that you normally would not have in the runtime environment, but the designers would definitely need them. So we saw how to add that using the control designer classes and the designer attributes added to our class. So next week we're going to move off the web and we're going to move on to the desktop, and we're going to be talking about Windows apps. You've been seeing me do a lot of applications based on it, but we really haven't talked about the system.windows.form object at all. So we're going to drill down into that, and we're going to take a look and see how we can do pretty much the same kinds of things we did in the web world with the desktop world, but we're also going to take it a little bit farther. There's some extra special things that we can do on the desktop that we can't do on the web. I do want to thank everybody for stopping out. Don't forget my blog address, blogs.msdn.com/wsteele, where you can download this code and all the previous stuff. You can also get to a link where you can download the slide decks and everything else that's associated with this. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Tracy while she gets you into the Q&A and gets you into the survey. I will be taking a look at the questions in the queue and answering those, and we'll see you guys next week.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. And remember, for more information, everyone can print a PDF of today's session. And in order to do that, you just need to go to the File menu and hit Print to PDF. We will be getting to the questions and answers here shortly, so please feel free to submit your questions now into the Q&A panel down to the bottom of your screen. Also, for any upcoming and previously recorded webcasts, you can visit Microsoft.com/webcast. You can access the first 15 parts in this series here, and as well as this webcast will be available in about 24 hours for download. If you have any webcast content ideas, if there's something out there that you'd like to see and haven't yet, we'd love to hear from you. Just take note of this link here. And for anybody who's interested in receiving a free 14-day trial of Microsoft Office Live Meetings, you'd want to visit Microsoft.com/presentlive. And now for filling out that survey today, you're going to be automatically entered in to win this 30-gigabyte Zune digital media player. So that gives a little incentive for you to fill that out for us today. And here is the survey. Please follow the links provided to complete today's webcast evaluation. And Bill, do you have any questions waiting there for you?
I sure do.
All right.
So let's see. Ted's asking, he says, your explanations look easy. Can I have a webcast on how to modify or change and make a more advanced custom control? You know what? I will look into doing that. I can't promise anything, but I do webcasts all the time, and since this webcast series is coming to an end here at the end of next month, I have a few weeks open before I start the WPF Soup to Nuts series. So we'll see what we can get in there. And in fact, I do know there are some custom control. There are some webcasts that we did in the past about building custom controls. I believe I'm trying to think of the term, Mike Benkovich built this series. Search Mike Benkovich, and if you go out to the URL benkotips, benkotips.com, you might be able to still find that webcast out there. I believe it was called WinForms Bonanza. And in the WinForms Bonanza session, he actually built a custom control out there. So if not, send me an email and I'll send you some more links to where you can get to that. I got one more question out there. It says, I know you can bubble up events from the control to a parent, but is it possible to send events down to a control? For example, change the label on a control when something happens on the parent. What terms could I use live.com to search for that? So that's an interesting question. You can actually bubble up events pretty easily, but having the child monitor the parent is actually something that you can do, and you can go both ways. What you're looking for there is what we call a callback. and a callback is kind of like an event, but you can actually hook that and actually pass in a method call whenever an event happens. The problem is the parent's going to be aware of it. The parent actually has to take an action to send that out to the client. You could otherwise simply poll that, poll that property on some timed interval to see if that parent property has changed to determine that you need to do that. I'm not real sure what else you can do in that case. Okay. And that's actually all the questions I have in here. Actually, one RK is asking, he's got a different problem. It says, Msdn webcast registration created an Outlook appointment with a start time of 10 a.m. Pacific, not 9 a.m. Pacific. You know what? I honestly don't know how that happened, unless it happened before or after the updates of the servers. If you're in the United States, you're aware that we just had some time changes. And it's possible that it was simply because the time changed. We did move forward an hour, which would make sense in your case because yours is forward an hour, off by that 1 hour. So it's possible because it was the time you actually got the Outlook appointment to the time it actually changed when you actually do that. This weekend, the time changed 1 hour, so it's possible it was simply because you downloaded it before that patch was available on your machine there. Outlook doesn't change the actual appointment time. It actually leaves them the same, as Dave's pointing out. It doesn't change the appointments. It's simply that's the time it came down as. That's an interesting one. Hopefully that won't happen again, simply because this time change doesn't occur until November again. All right, that's all the questions I had in the queue. I want to thank everybody for stopping out. Don't forget, next week we're going to be talking about WinForms, and also don't forget that Ron Cundiff is doing the VB Soup to Nuts series. I'm not real sure when his next session is. It might be today. So if you haven't seen any of that, I'd recommend you go out there and take a look at those. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. I do want to extend a very special thank you to Bill for your presentation today and answering all the questions we had come through. I'd also like to thank the audience for attending today's Msdn webcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's session. The audience may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's presentation.